Anyone who's read Beelzebub's tales will know that Gurdjieff makes a big deal out of suggestibility. And there's a very, well, sort of amusing but also tragic tale of someone who he played effectively some kind of joke on, just to illustrate the point. He was due to make a journey from Fontainebleau to Paris, and his car needed a new headlamp. And so he asked one of his groupies to fix a new headlamp. He'd got about 2 hours to do it, which was enough time really. When he came to the car, the headlamp still wasn't fixed. And so he got this guy and he said, look, I've got to make this journey. You need to sit on the bonnet of my car and hold the headlamp. And so this guy, in total obedience, sat on the bonnet of the car, and Mr. Gurdjieff said, effectively, get off, you fool. Have you no integrity or common sense? And it's a very good example of how many people approach the Gurdjieff work. They believe that everything that Mr. Gurdjieff said is 100% correct. And as I've mentioned in other videos, I knew some people who knew Gurdjieff, and one of the first things that they told me was, make your own mind up. Don't take everything on face value, because Mr. Gurdjieff could sometimes be wrong. Of course, if you look on YouTube, you'll see lots of videos with somber music, maybe some of Mr. Gurdjieff's music in the background, and images of oriental places and misty images of strange things, strange symbols. The whole works. And of course it's very romantic, it appeals to our emotional nature, but really we shouldn't be taken in by that kind of thing. The bottom line is, and Mr. Gurdjieff said it himself in Beelzebub's tales, these days people's reasoning ability is so poor that they will believe anything. And it was Uspensky who said, after he'd left Gurdjieff's group, that he didn't really know whether Gurdjieff was a good man or an evil man. And the truth is, Gurdjieff had probably transcended what many of us consider to be good and evil, and he was probably both. So, suggestibility is, well, it's a strange thing in the Gurdjieff work, because Mr. Gurdjieff talks endlessly about it, and yet you find the vast majority of people involved in the Gurdjieff work are extraordinarily suggestible. The only antidote to this is to use your own reasoning capabilities. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about objective reason as being a very high level of attainment within man. Well, maybe most of us are not going to achieve objective reason, but we can strive to attain it by using our reason and not being blindly influenced by everything he and other people, prominent people in the Gurdjieff work, suggest. So really it becomes a matter of standing on your own feet. And have you got the courage to do that? Or do you need approval from someone? This is a very, very big thing, a very big issue for all of us. Standing on your own feet makes you feel naked, because normally we are looking for approval and a statement of what we should do or how we should be from external sources, and those external sources are numerous. Society itself tries to tell us exactly how we should live. Get married, get a job, have kids, watch TV, go and play sports, whatever it is that we seem to think is a normal life. So society itself does that. And then there are religions which most of them anyway have some kind of value system associated with them. And we fortunately, in one way, take a great deal of notice of that, because if there were no religions, then mankind would, because of its base nature, would fall into some kind of bestiality and debauchery. So the religions play a useful role, but they're not particularly useful if you are on a spiritual path. I hate that word spiritual, but there is no other word for it. So, we can read the Bible or whatever, spiritual work, and take our value system from there without particularly thinking about what's being said and whether it's sensible and whether it applies to us and is meaningful for us. We also take guidance, if you like, from almost everything around us. So our teachers when we were at school, peers in life, and in fact peer emulation in life is one of the strongest things. I've spoken to many people who, because they pursue some kind of spiritual work, tend to feel a little bit alienated in life. And I'm afraid that's the price you will pay to some extent. And in fact, the further you go down the path of genuine spiritual work, so you may feel more alienated. And you will have to do what Mr. Gurdjieff suggests, which is you will have to act in life. Because you may not find particular social situations appealing, but they may be, well, not obligatory, but they may be necessary for a reasonable social existence. So standing on your own feet is a big, big thing, and it means being responsible for your own understanding. Now, this brings me to a point that possibly should be a separate video, but I'll probably go into it in this one. I get asked by people, well, what's the difference between philosophy and religion? You know what? It depends what philosophers you read and which religions you have followed or read. But the answer in the main is there is no difference. The thing that people misunderstand about many of the philosophers is that they think that they are just sort of big brains that have worked out some cunningly complex way to understand life, but it's not the case. So if you read Schopenhauer, Kant, Spinoza, and there's a few more, then you will learn things from them. Now the mistake that people make with philosophy is because it's largely an academic domain, is they don't do what Mr. Gurdjieff would suggest, which is to understand it with the whole of your being. So you don't just understand it with your head, you understand it with your feelings as well. So when, for example, Kant says that space and time are properties of our consciousness, well, there's a mind-blowing thing. Anyway, space and time are properties of our consciousness. Then you can read that, and Kant is very, very good at sort of legitimizing his argument. And in fact, Schopenhauer continues with that argument. But you need to feel that, and you need to validate it for yourself. Is there really anything out there that you are aware of that does not come through your senses and is in turn not constructed by your brain? Well, there isn't anything. And there's some complex arguments around that, which I'm not going to go into, but to suddenly realize that what is talked about as Maya or Maya in the Hindu tradition, i.e. the world of illusion, suddenly becomes a little bit more understandable. So one of the most useful things ever said to me was, again, this is by someone who knew Gurdjieff, was you have to do your own work. You have to find your own way. There's an illusion that is propagated really by the so-called spiritual gurus that there are formulas that we can follow to achieve some kind of happiness or enlightenment, if there is such a thing as enlightenment, and that they hold the key and they have the formula to do that. Well, I would suggest that you read U.G. Krishnamurti, not the other Krishnamurti, the very famous one, but U.G. Krishnamurti, because he is fairly adamant that there is no such thing as enlightenment, and all the so-called spiritual gurus that have come from the East particularly are charlatans. It's a fairly broad statement to make. I'm not sure if he's correct, but I think there's an element of truth in it. There's a very big business now in selling Eastern wisdom to the West. Why? Because the West has no values left. The West is totally floundering in its secularism. It's lost religion, which was once a useful support for most people. It gave them a frame of reference in which to operate in life. But that has been largely discredited by, in many people's eyes anyway, by science and the rational approach to things. In reality, the rational approach is not an enemy of religious thought or spiritual experience. But people create these categories. So anyway, read U.G. Krishnamurti, because it's a true eye-opener. And he was raised to be a spiritual guru, and he had an experience at the age of 49 when he realized that it was all bullshit. What he'd been taught anyway. And he came to understand something very profound, that there is no mind. Again, if that's something that you want insight into, then you need to study Buddhism and probably specifically Zen Buddhism. And I talk about studying. Of course, it's not just studying. You have to find practical application. So, for example, the 17th century philosopher Spinoza produced what is commonly regarded as the most difficult work in philosophy, his Ethics. And yet, as you go through the Ethics, you find that he's actually talking about many practices that can be adopted to help us deal with the emotions. Because as far as he's concerned, the emotions are our bondage. And we glorify the emotions. Particularly people of an emotional nature will glorify the emotions. But in reality, they are our bondage. And if we can, to some extent, become masters of our emotions, then a different world can emerge within us. So, do not be suggestible. Figure things out for yourself. Taste things for yourself. If they taste good, then do more of it. If they don't taste right, then discard it. It was once explained to me as a smorgasbord. There's a whole array of things out there, and some of them will be very useful for you, and some of them will actually be damaging. So you have to use your own common sense and your own judgments, and do what Mr. Gurdjieff suggests. Do not be suggestible, and do the equivalent of sitting on the bonnet of a car to hold a headlamp. Because a lot of these people in the Gurdjieff work, particularly the ones who knew Gurdjieff and who are higher up in the so-called hierarchy, are not straightforward people. They're not going to hand whatever you want to you on a plate. They want you to work for it. So they will mislead deliberately, and you could see that as a bad thing to do. but all they're doing is trying to get people to use their own intelligence instead of just taking everything they read as gospel. Anyway, hope that's useful.